But first, we're going to talk a little bit about language learning. Now, I'm presuming that all of you are language educators. I presume you are all pretty expert language educators. A lot of people, when they sort of discover and are curious about what I do, it's normally because already you are quite intuitively expert at what you do. And I know that many of you who have already become neurolanguage coaches, when you've taken the course, you are already shifting into this direction. So tonight, I just want to introduce a little bit about neurolanguage coaching. And Virginia, yes, you're an expert enthusiast. Yes, I think, you know, when you come into languages and when you become a polyglot yourself, you just carry the love, you carry the passion. And Virginia, I know you carry that passion for Chinese so much. It's beautiful. Now, there is a lot of hype at the moment about language coaching. So we're going to just clarify a little bit what is neuro-language coaching. And for me, this vector diagram brings in a little bit the essence, because we're bringing in the neuro, which could be neuroscience, neuropsychology, emotional intelligence. Obviously, we all come from the teaching, and we're also bringing in the professional coaching. And I'm using the word professional coaching because of the training that we carry in the background. Now, back in 2017, in my first book, I created this table. And can I share with all of you that this table has created a lot of polemic along the way. So I get a lot of people very passionately saying, we are not over there on the right, that's not teaching. And I totally agree with you. As I said when we started, all of you, I suspect, are already shifting over to the left side, or you're already very much in that left side. However, there are pockets of the earth where we still have very traditional teaching. Now, when we think about coaching, we are thinking about extremely active learners. So we're shifting the burden on them. We're shifting the ownership of the learning, the responsibility of the learning back to them, which is something that learners are not kind of used to nowadays. We're also taking into account motivation, empathy, compassion. We know that we need to keep them engaged, committed. When we talk about coaching, we're starting to talk about an equal status, coach and coachee. And that's very important, especially when we're coming into this non-judgment, non-directive approach. And normally in a coaching process, I would say books are fantastic to trigger, to instigate, to stimulate, but we're not there to just go through the book. Now, we're going to be looking a little bit in depth what coaching is. We're going to really go deeper. One highlight I do want to bring to all of you, coaching is a service. And that philosophy behind it actually means that we have to be very focused on the cost effectiveness, the impact of the learning. And especially if we're bringing coaching into education. Now, back in 2014, we had a study conducted by Dimitris in Greece. If any of you are interested, that was one of the first studies that was conducted on us. That was when we had about 150 neurolanguage coaches in the world. Now we are about 1,500. And in 2021, we had another lady doing her university degree studying the impact of neurolanguage coaching. And last year, we actually did a case study. And the case study in a company demonstrated just with 12 sessions, so 12 weeks of neurolanguage coaching, there was a significant statistical impact in their learning. If any of you are interested, I'm happy to send you that study in full. And at the moment, we're just waiting for one of our coaches who has, and Virginia knows this, one of our coaches has done a study throughout last year with children in China, applying neurolanguage coaching in the classroom. And she's just finalizing her thesis, and that will be hopefully published in the fall. And again, there is a qualitative impact in the classroom with kiddies. So brilliant that we're getting these results on the impact. And obviously, many of our neurolanguage coaches with individual personal testimonials and impact. Now, let's just connect in. Obviously, we have the three elements, neuro, language, coaching. Now, the language expertise is yours. All of you are language experts. What we are bringing in is enhancing, impacting the way of delivery. And we're doing that with the coaching and with the neuro. Now, I'm going to go into the neuro first, because I think we have a double explosion in the world. We have a neuro explosion and we have a coaching explosion. So when I started this in 2012 and everybody was looking at me as if I was a strange person on earth, now I feel very much happy that everybody is coming into this with me and I'm not the only one going in this direction. So let's have a look at the neuroscience. And please, 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 all of you, when you think about neuroscience, I want you to think about neuro, because that could be translated into neuropsychology. It could also come into the emotional intelligence. And I always say to people when they come to my course, neuro refers to neurons. It refers to nerve cells. It doesn't just refer to the brain. For me, this is about the holistic connection of brain, heart, intuition, and looking at the learner from that holistic standpoint. Now, one of the implications of the neuro era that we're living in is this era of metacognition. This is where we all have to become more metacognitive. What does that mean? We have to become more conscious and more aware of what we're doing and how we're doing it. Some of you may have followed that I've been doing quite a few webinars recently about artificial intelligence and stepping up our humanness. Personally, I think this is quite urgent. We need to step up our humanness and our metacognitive skills. So how do we do that? Well, we incorporate it in various manners in the classroom. And here you can see a little bit that being aware, empowering the learner autonomy, bringing in the research. But for me, it's actually about embodying the research. It's not just to regurgitate. We have to live it. We have to breathe it. We have to be it. And the first premise, every brain is different. We're coming more and more into the respect for neurodiversity. You know, the neuroscientists say that 1/3 of our brain is genetic makeup, and 2/3 is what we are inputting through life. Now, for me, that's very significant because your genetic third is totally different to mine. And what you have lived through, what you've learned, what you've experienced through life is totally different to my experience. Now, the basic functioning or the basic makeup of the brain is the same. However, each and every one of us interprets life in a totally different way. We all have different perspectives. We all have different ways of interpreting information. And as an educator, this is now the era where we are starting to adapt to them, not them adapting to us. How do we do that? With a class of 30? Well, there we need to also start to think about how we can change the systems. little by little. But the starting point is us. Now, what is learning? Well, learning is neuroplasticity. It's changing the brain. Thinking is firing the networks. Learning is wiring, or if you like, imprinting. And the storage of information, and then the retrieval of that information to be able to implement it, use it. Now, from the neuro perspective, there are 7 different aspects that we are bringing in. I call it the pervasive neuroscience that we live in neurolanguage coaching. And these are the 7 points, and we're going to go through each and every one of them. If some of you follow me on LinkedIn, you probably saw last week, I reposted some research on the importance of breathing and the connection of breathing and learning. Fascinating stuff, but actually, I think it's quite logical, because when we are calm and in a relaxed state, we are breathing in a very natural way, deep breaths. When we are panicking, that's when we go into that short breath and the state of panic. Now, obviously, in a panicked state, we cannot learn. Makes sense. But interesting that the neuroscience now is coming out with a lot of justifications. By the way, everybody, breathing instantly changes the brain waves. And I'll say that again because it's very significant. Breathing instantly changes brain waves. So when we learn how to breathe properly and when we are in a calm state, it impacts the brain. Now, psychological safety. Firstly, we need to be able to explain to our learners what is happening when they go into fight or flight. I've explained this story quite a few times, so forgive me if you've heard this story before. I was working with a very high-level C1 executive in Holland, brilliant English. However, when he was in meetings, blocked and stuttering. So the first thing I did was ask permission, may I share with you a little bit what might be happening with the brain? And I explained in very simple terms what happens when we go into fight or flight. And this can be in a nutshell. So in a nutshell, when we go into a panicked mode, a survival mode, let's say everything starts kicking in. The blood is pumping to the arms and legs so that we can run or fight the enemy. Breathing is getting shorter, heartbeat is getting faster. The prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus are starting to deplete of resources, because the message has gone to the reptilian brain, the survival brain, and that part of the brain has kicked in with a survival response. So the 2 areas that we need for learning are not fully functional. So I explained this to the learner and he said, Rachel, I'm in my 50s and it's the first time somebody's explained that to me. And yes, that's exactly what's happening. I'm shutting down. So the next question, what's the trigger? What's the emotional trigger that is making this happen? And he had a long think about this. And he actually came up with an interesting answer. He said, when I don't feel that I sound English enough, that's when it's happening. I feel that my Dutch accent is coming out. I feel that, that I'm conscious of it. And that's pushing the trigger. So then the question was, well, which are the words? Which are the sounds? Let's get them out on the table. And even more fascinating, when he gave me the sounds and the words, they were exactly the same sounds as in English. So his brain thought they were Dutch, but actually they were shared sounds. So when he realized that, he naturally started to calm down. And we then created a list, we created a pool of those potential words. That was one side calming him down. Then the question was, when this happens in your next meeting and you go into a fight or flight again, what strategies could you build up to catch yourself or to give yourself time to recover? So he then created a glass of water scenario, or excuse me, I need to make a note, so that he could physically recover. Now, this is extremely important to explain fight or flight to the learner, and then to really see what is the emotional trigger and to understand the emotional triggers from our side, because there are many emotional triggers. It might be status, it might be autonomy, it might be I can't relate to the language, it might be shame, embarrassment, emotional, it might be xenoglossophobia, it might be I don't relate to the person in front of me and the person in front of me, I don't like them. It could be anything. And if we can help them to come into that, understand it, strategize it, we're going to help them to get beyond those emotional blocks. Now, this could mean we have tactics like simplifying terminology. It could mean that we're checking in with them constantly, but definitely it's about giving them psychological safety and psychological safety with us. Now, I know in the middle of this slide, I make a reference to alcohol consumption. And the reason I do that, everybody, is because you know when you have a glass of wine, we call it Dutch courage. And normally what happens is that shuts down the prefrontal cortex, but it shuts it down in a way that you start to relax and you start to flow. And often in a relaxed state, that's when we become more fluent. Not in a panicked state. Now, we're going to talk later about the subconscious and conscious learning, so we'll come back a little bit to that. So, just recapping, if there is a limbic reaction, because this is where the limbic region, the amygdala is located there, it's kicking in with that response. The amygdala is signaling to the reptilian brain, survival instinct kicking in. That's when we know the two areas that we need for learning are shutting down. And it's primordial, it's essential that we help learners to go beyond that survival mode. Now, here is a little bit of research demonstrating, I know it's for mathematics, but actually I think for some people, language learning is worse than mathematics. Maybe you have some learners that are really terrified of speaking in public. And we see in 2002, the first one, exactly what I've said, anxiety diminishes, prefrontal cortex functions. And in number 2, just the thought of doing mathematics triggers the pain areas in the brain. Wow. So even for some people, just the thought of speaking languages could be triggering them. Second pervasive point in neuroscience is motivation. You know, I was with one of our groups this week, and I do actually think that we've got motivation confused through the years. When I've got a learner that comes in and said, yes, I'm highly motivated, I need it for work, that for me triggers alarm bells, because I need it for work doesn't sound like it's something exciting, fun, passionate. It sounds like something that they need, and it sounds like a reason for being there. Now, there's a lot of research. I think many of you know the research on intrinsic, extrinsic. You've got Simon Sinek, if any of you know that why behind the why behind the why are we doing something? And definitely we need to try to go beyond the reasons. And we need to understand the difference between this is the reason for being here, but now let's find out what's behind that. Where could this language take you? What could it bring you? How could it change your life? And definitely no more I motivate the learner scenarios. I hear this from many teachers. I motivate my learners. Actually, no, we can amuse them, entertain them. We can be very funny with them. We can keep them happy there, but we cannot change their intrinsic feelings. So what we are trying to do is stimulate them with coaching questions. Now, we know from the research that motivation is key. Motivation will help imprinting. The more emotional impact, the more passion, motivation to learn, the more they're going to want to be there, and it's going to be imprinting. Just let me give you an example of motivation. And we're talking about motivation for the brain to really want to learn something. Imagine all of you are with me at a conference. And I say to all of you, hey, Ulrika, let me introduce you to Chris and Eric and Beatrice and Ina and Tuba, because I can see you all in Celia. And you all say, hi, hello, great to meet you. You turn your back, you've forgotten their names. Now, if I say to all of you, okay, let me introduce you. Now, on Monday, you're all going to be getting together to arrange a talk together because we are inviting you to the next conference. I can guarantee you're all going to start looking at each other's names a bit more deeply, and your brain is going to start taking note. And if I said to all of you, actually, Rika, let me introduce you to Ina. Ina is going to be your next boss. Ping! Your brain has really kicked into that name. Now, how can we get learning to be the same? How can we connect them into, okay, what is it that you really, really want here? Where is this going to take you? Is it a promotion? Is it a relocation? Think of all those kiddies in countries where learning English is going to get them into a new life. And constantly, how can we then keep connecting them back to that vision that they've created together with the learning? So this is about what is their vision? And if we cannot, isn't an apparent one, that's where we need to go into deeper coaching conversations to discover it and to help them to discover it. They have to discover it, not me know it. Now we're going to come into one of my favorite expressions in life. Energy flows where attention goes. You know, a lot of people think this is from that little book, The Secret. Actually, it's not. It's from Hermes, the philosopher, who is much older than that little book, The Secret. And it really is how the brain functions. Wherever you place the focus and attention of the brain, that's where the energy is going, and that's where you're going to reinforce neural connections. Now, as an educator, I need to understand that fully because I need to know where my learner's focus is all the time. And there's one thing that we do as a tactic, which is from the coaching, it's actually signposting constantly what we're going to do, where we're going next, what we've just done, where we're going to move on to, because that's going to bring their focus with me all the time. Let me just give you an example as well. You know, I need to pay attention to their focus because half an hour playing the piano every single day. I'm focused on the piano, I'm playing it, I'm practicing, my attention is going there. I'm going to get better because I'm doing it every single day. Now that's a positive example. Let me give you a negative one. If I've got a learner who is constantly saying, I can't do this, I'm never going to do this, I'm no good at this, I told you I'm no good at this, I keep telling you I can't do this, where is the focus and attention of their brain? It's constantly in the negative. I can't, I can't, I can't. Now, we also have to understand how we can shift their focus and really find out, okay, I'm sorry that this is how you're feeling. What do we need to do to get you to feel better here? How can we get you learning for once and for all? And that is what I call compassionate conversations. We're shifting their focus. Now, if we take it into a different direction, also when we are in that attention, we're creating new neural connections, which is neuroplasticity. We come back to where we started at the beginning. So what can they do to keep reinforcing, to keep coming back? We have the research about spacing, about how long-term memory works, creating the habit of learning as well. And we have to also be sharing with them how the brain learns. Now, definitely, here it also means learner autonomy, learner ownership. We said this at the beginning as well. Responsibility. We have to take a back seat. We are doing too much for them. They have to take the reins again. Now, in the process that we actually do, we come into a goal setting with our learner where the learner is setting the goals. The learner is setting their activities. The learner is creating a pathway forward, and we go away with the ingredients and we create the roadmap. They create the content, we create the roadmap. And we're constantly pushing that learner autonomy. They are always involved, so their focus and attention is always there. And my favorite expression in the neuroscience from T. Doyle, neuroscientist, the one who does the work is the one who does the learning. We have to stop doing it for them. May I even suggest we have to stop preparing and preparing and preparing. We have to stop giving copies. We have to stop showing them the books. We have to get them creating materials. We have to get them creating conversations with us. We have to get them into a dynamic mode so that they are firing and wiring. That's exactly what we want. And by the way, the research already in the 70s and 80s demonstrating that when people actually set their own goals, they create that autonomous learning space for themselves, they attain those goals more than when people are told what to do. And here we're going into what I would call my favorite part. Oh, Diana, you're asking about young learners. Which bit are you asking about? Sorry, I should have seen that earlier. Which part do you mean with younger learners? Do you want to just jump on?
Yes, I'm a K-12 teacher and I have second graders. So I'm trying to see how I can get them involved with this or engaged into some.
Okay, so there I would say it's about, how many do you have in the class, Diana?
About 23 of them, and you're talking about the numbers, so I thought that, yeah, the number alone is quite big. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, we do have quite a few neurolanguage coaches with classes, and I think it is about just having that general open discussion with the class to explain to them, you know, we're going to really find out what you all want here. Now, the problem with schools is that you have a curricula in the background that you have to follow, but within that curricula, you can ask them, okay, how do you want us to do this? We've got to reach this point. How can we break this down? And even how could we break you into teams where some of you are doing one thing, some are doing another thing, and you take the reins, everybody. Now, I had a lady in Chile, brilliant, how she handled her class. She had the objective, And the children actually decided that they wanted to create a magazine to demonstrate the language that they had to use. And they took the reins, they created the magazine, they had groups doing different articles, creating it, they had different activities to get to that point. And they, as a class, she was just the instigator and the facilitator, and the kids did everything. The kids were happy, they loved it. And afterwards, they actually were featured in the local newspaper. So that's the impact that it had on that class, giving the class that little bit more autonomy. Okay, so just ideas. I would speak to them. You know, we think that children don't know. Actually, children do. And many children know what they want and what they don't want. Definitely. Elaine, you're saying that many...
Thank you.
Yes, Diane, thank you. I often hear learners claiming they hate English, that's why they cannot learn. The truth is they siphon off their frustration in not being able to communicate for career purposes. Now there I would say, when we come to the next part, which is breaking it down, number 5, Elaine, that's when we'll come a little bit deeper into your comment there. Let's go back to number 4. And as I said, this is my favorite part, everybody. Because there is a little book from the 1970s, if any of you are old enough to remember the 70s. It's called The Inner Game of Tennis. And it was written by a tennis coach, Timothy Galway. And as a tennis coach, he was absolutely intrigued that when he was telling people what to do, you have to do it like this and do it like this, and people were saying to themselves, I must, they weren't doing it. But when he said to them, look, see yourself, feel it, experience it, and he got them actually saying what they were doing, bounce, hit, bounce, run, bounce, lob, and they were saying it as they were doing it. And even he would move behind and move them into that hit. That's when they were doing it. And his whole little book talks about thinking brain, executive functions, prefrontal cortex, performing brain, subconscious taking over. And his conclusion, and this is before all the neuroscience, by the way, everybody, his conclusion was that when people are in that performing brain and this prefrontal cortex is shut down, that's when people perform best. Now, since then, we've actually gone into the research about the flow state. Flow state is performing brain. Flow state is peak performance. We are 500% more productive when we are in flow states. And can I just share with all of you, that particular book heavily influenced the creation of the first coaching model, GROW, G-R-O-W. If any of you know a little bit about coaching, that was the first model ever, and it was a brain-based model. Fascinating. Now, what do we mean with this? Well, and this is where we as language learners, language educators, need to understand that there are 2 ways of learning a language. Firstly, let's talk about kiddies. Let's talk about us as kiddies. In those first 7 years, we are mostly learning through our subconscious brain. The reason being, the prefrontal cortex does not start to develop until after the age of 8. So we are fully functioning, we're driving from the subconscious brain. Now that makes sense because literally we are absorbing everything. Babies just absorb everything. So much so that at the age of about 18 months, babies have to go through a pruning process to get rid of all the extra connections that they don't need. Now let's talk about our native language. When we learn our native language, it takes us about 5 years to learn our native language well. Would you all agree? About 5 years to learn our native language well? 5, 6? Let's see what you all think then. By when do we speak our native language well, everybody? Let me just check in, see if you're all awake. 4, okay, 4. Sanella, some never do. That's another story. 5, 6, 7, okay. Ed, you're on the train, I know you are. 7, right, okay. Actually, you know what? Let's take between 4 and 7. It takes us between 4 and 7 years to learn native language well. That's a long time, everybody. Now, we're only learning it through our subconscious brain. We're only learning it through subconscious input because we don't have the capacity to reason. Now, after the age of 7 or 8, that's when we start to develop prefrontal cortex. That's when we start to develop critical thinking, analytical thinking, etc. And one of the major problems is that when we are teaching languages at schools, and when we are learning languages as adults, we think the only way to learn a language is through explicit learning, through theory, grammar, studying, analyzing. And we forget the subconscious learning. Now, may I suggest, we've said 4 to 7 years, only subconscious learning as a kid. And by the way, I would agree with that because I was living in Germany, and believe me, I never had, well, I had two lessons and that was it. It took me about 5 or 6 years to learn German just by living there with no lessons. So no explicit input. It took me so long. However, well, let's go the other end. French, I started learning at the age of 8 and came out of school at the age of 16, not really speaking, but kind of understanding the explicit theory. And then being able to speak, I mean, we're looking at about 10, 12, 13 years to learn French. Now, other languages, for example, when I learned Spanish, I did the explicit input first. And here I'm sharing with all of you my private life. I fell in love at the age of 15 and started learning Spanish to write love letters. And so for 2 years, I was just learning to write and writing, and I got to a C1 level writing. And then it took me 6 months living in Spain to marry it together. So it took me 2.5 years, let's say, to learn Spanish. Now, let me give you the extreme example. If you have somebody living in a country, immersed in the language, and they add explicit learning, you've got people that can learn a language in 1 year. Remember, we've been saying 4 to 7 years, subconscious learning, 10 to 12 years, explicit learning. We could be turbocharging our learners into learning faster if we also remember to get them to come into that implicit learning as well. Now, what does this mean? Because we get very confused with this. Implicit learning means, it doesn't mean sitting down to learn. It means just allowing it, exposing, bombarding the brain to the language, having it on in the background. I remember watching Spanish TV. By the way, I've learned Catalan through the television, nothing else. Just by watching the TV, I know Catalan. So implicit learning is key for learners. Now, at this point, please do not be alarmed by the first bullet point here. I just want to tell you a little story about the power of the subconscious brain. And some of you may know this. A lot of the brain books nowadays go into these beautiful stories, but this one for me stuck with me greatly. Apparently in the 1800s, the Japanese were the best in the world at distinguishing the sex of chickens. They would just pick up a chicken and say male or female. And apparently this is really hard because you cannot tell the difference. And the British went to Japan and asked the Japanese, okay, well, how do you do it? And the Japanese turned around and said, we've no idea. We just do it. So they said, well, teach us. And they said, we don't know how. So what they did, they literally got the British to pick up the chicken and say male or female, and the Japanese person would say right or wrong. And literally, by doing it that way, they built up this subconscious intelligence to distinguish between the male and the female. My message to us is we cannot underestimate the power of our subconscious brains. And we do. Now, there is a book called Stealing Fire by Stephen Kotler. In that book, he talks about the fact that the US military, DARPA, Navy SEALs, have got a program where people are learning a language in 6 weeks. 6 weeks, everybody. How do they do it? Well, seemingly they put people into flotation tanks. And I don't know if they just leave them there for 6 weeks. I don't want to know. But they bombard the subconscious brain with the language. Again, demonstration of the power of the subconscious brain. Now, we need to speak with our learners. We really need to speak with our learners about this subconscious input. What does it mean? It means that the learners, when they're not with us, they need to think about, how am I going to bombard my brain with this language? Now, I had an Italian lady, very frustrated, very much old school learner. I need to learn by doing it, externing. So we had a talk. May we talk about this? How about with that explicit learning, we start to see if we can surround that with implicit input. So what can you do to expose your brain to this language? She changed the telephone into English. She changed the TV into English. She only watched everything in English. Whether she was watching it or not, she had podcasts or whatever going on when she was cooking. In the car, she had the radio in English. She literally, her surrounding became English in Italy. Her partner started to converse with her in English. Some people at work started to converse with her in English. She only read English papers, books, internet, everything in English. 3 months. We did it like a little test, like a challenge. Towards the end of the 3 months, she called me and she said, Rachel, I now understand what you mean. I was in a meeting and suddenly I came out with a word that I have never in my life said before, and I have no idea where it came from. And the word was beneath. Normally, she said she would always use the word under. But somehow this word came out and she really thought, wow, where on earth did that come from? And then she realized, obviously her subconscious brain had picked it up somewhere. And I have my own little story because I can remember the word Aufmerksamkeit in German. And I can remember sitting on a plane from Germany to Italy, looking at the safety instructions and thinking, I know this word. Where do I know this word from? How do I know this word? And then it dawned on me, that word was written all over the fire extinguisher on the 2nd floor as I got upstairs as I went up the stairs to my flat. That's the power of the subconscious brain. So the more that we can get our learners to understand this, the faster they are going to be learning. Number 5, chunking it down. By the way, this is the mantra of the Neurolanguage coach. chunk it down, chunk it down. We do actually have one lady who gets it confused and she calls it chuck it down, chuck it down. I need to tell her that that's only in England when it's raining a lot. Chunking it down is key for the brain. Now, what does that mean? Well, in the 1950s, actually, Miller introduced this concept, but we now understand from the neuroscience that actually the brain does work more effectively when things are broken down. If ever you have an enormous problem in life, if ever you have an enormous topic to learn, it could push us into that fight or flight because we lose the certainty. We need certainty in life. So when we start to break things down, that's when we're bringing in certainty. And that's when the brain starts to feel comfortable. Now, in neurolanguage coaching, we bring in goals, goal setting. When you goal set, you squeeze them down. If you've got a learner that says, I want to be fluent, not acceptable anymore, what does that mean? Who are you talking with? What are you talking about? How does that conversation go? Let's break it down. We need to be able to break that down. Otherwise, there's no focus, there's no attention, and the brain is going into panic. When will I be fluent? It's like asking, how long is a piece of string? And we have to break grammar down. Now, we really are experts at taking a grammar area and then breaking it down and building it back up. So breaking it down brings certainty. And you not only break down grammar, you also break down functional language. You have step-by-step goals with concrete time periods. And even this question of, okay, well, how much can you do every day? 5 minutes, 10 minutes, brilliant. And what about the impact on the subconscious brain, that what we've just spoken about? You know, with all of those elements, you're going to get more effective learning. Now, in my book, the brain-based grammar book, literally, it is a book full of breakdowns. And the breakdowns that we do are the script for the coaching conversations. So this isn't about, you all know the grammar. You're all experts in grammar. What you have here is a pathway through the conversation. We're breaking it down and creating a logical pathway to build that topic up. And we do it with all grammar areas. And may I suggest you can do this by yourselves and in any language whatsoever. So breaking it down is key. And can I say, and this is going to be polemic for some of you, constant connection to target language. What do I mean with this? Well, the brain loves to scaffold. That's how the brain functions. So we need to find out, from where is my language learner scaffolding from? And what language families do they already have? And how can I help them to springboard? Now, I know this is a little bit polemic because I know that a lot of the teacher training, etc., always says no native, always in native language. What I'm saying is we should be provoking the connections. And that means we are following this research from 2016. This research demonstrates clearly when we learn a new language, our brain is going to the native grammar structures first. Now, when I look back at my own learning journey with languages, as you all know, French at school and Latin and Greek, the French and the Latin obviously helped me with my Spanish love letters, and that got me into Spanish. which then got me into Catalan, no lessons. I then went to live in Italy and transformed them both and learned Italian, no lessons. And then in Germany, I was struggling all those years, 2 lessons. Eventually I learned, but the key for me was when I opened the doors to the Germanic side of English. I think after about 4 years of frustration of saying, what's wrong with me? Why can't I learn German? It was because my brain was full of Latin connected families. And that's when the door opened to the Germanic side. And now the languages that I'm learning at the moment, I'm constantly looking, what's different? What's similar? How is it different? Where are the similarities? How can I springboard? And this is what we need to be constantly asking our learners. Because our brains actually do go to the native language. Now, also, how can we help them to build bridges? How can we help them make connections? You know, if I know that my learner has a strong connection on the one side, and we're learning something new, which is a weak connection, what can I do to give them a bridge to learn that? Now, for example, if I've got a learner learning Spanish, and we've come to the word hogar, hogar means home or fireplace. So if I show them a picture with a home and a fireplace, we're going to get a visual. And if we also take the HO and say, right, they start with the same letters, I'm trying to springboard also from a strong connection to bring them in a new word fast. So again, how can you help them to build the bridges? How can you ask them, what's going to help you to remember this? Final point here, to know the brain. And we come back to circling to the metacognition. Now, there is research from 2019 which talks about the effectiveness of teaching metacognition in schools. I love this research, by the way, because it clearly talks about 3 aspects which we bring in to neurolanguage. Firstly, the autonomous learner. How are you going to learn? What works for you? And also self-regulated goals. You are the owner of your learning process. Enhancing cognitive skills, talking about the brain, and also understanding how do you learn best? What works for you? And this particular research demonstrates better performance, better outcomes, and what I call the fireball effect, positive motivation. And it really did work for all different types of learners. So my suggestion is that we need to start talking a lot more about the brain with learners, but we also need to be implementing all the neuroscience. We need to be living it, embodying it, breathing it, not only just regurgitating, as I said earlier. And knowing self, well, we're in the meta era, meta mood, meta emotion, meta learning, meta philosophy. We could meta all night. So yes, what do they prefer as activities? What do they hate? Because I don't want to get you doing things that you hate. How are they emotionally? What is their state? I talk about the perfect learning state. We look at brain waves. We look at getting them into the flow state. We look at how to get them into explicit now, implicit flow when we need it. And about building up learning resilience, healthy habits, all of that is going to impact. And just even getting them to think about, well, how are you going to trick your brain to learn this? Is it going to be a survival question that you need to learn English? Is it going to be a useful? Is it going to be an emotional impact? Are you going to create that curiosity? And how do we then bring in this constant recall? And just before we close the neuroscience part, I just want to talk about dopamine. Dopamine really does matter in the learning. Dopamine means getting them into the right brain state. Dopamine is one of the binding chemicals in the prefrontal cortex. It helps to bind those neural connections. Now, how do we create dopamine? Well, curiosity, variety, novelty, rewards also, and positivity, praise, recognition, encouragement, all of that is going to get their dopamine flowing. Now, actually, in the research, we actually also see that dopamine controls retention. It's not only about the emotional, but also the retention of the learning. And if there's no motivation, performance goes down. So dopamine actually triggers the brain to remember. We could really have that equation. Dopamine equals engagement and retention. And then you have a list, as I said, curiosity, playful, novelty, variety, fun, rewards, praise, recognition, positivity. All of that is how the learning process should be with us. Now we're closing the neuro side and we're now coming into the coaching side. And can I just come back to what we said at the beginning? There is a lot of hype about coaching at the moment, and a lot of hype about language coaching and what language coaching is, what it isn't. I'm going to say here, all definitions of coaching, language coaching are valid. In coaching, I always say when people in my course, there is no right or wrong. What there is a lot of confusion. And may I say that neurolanguage coaching, there is no confusion. We know exactly what we're doing. We have clarity, structure, focus, and frameworks that we work with. Language coaching could be a little bit this candle in the wind. I always say that we need to have structure in a learning process. And what we are doing is we're bringing in coaching as a communicative vehicle. So why use coaching? Well, various reasons actually. And firstly, I'm going to say what we said before. The one who does the work does the learning. We need autonomous learners. Coaching, again, there's a lot of confusion. Let's take the sports coach. The sports coach is actually there to enhance performance. The sports coach is very directive, but the sports coach, the spirit of coaching is there, empowering, pushing you beyond your limits. Now, in the 1970s, when life coaching, executive coaching, business coaching started to develop in the US, it developed with a totally different concept. And the concept in those years and now still is the soundboard. The facilitator, the soundboard. I'm not there to tell you. So in the life coaching and business coaching arena, theoretically, the coach is there to stimulate, provoke, and mirror. Now, we always say that that means you, my learner, are in the driving seat. I'm your GPS. I'm your navigator. And I can help you to navigate this way or that way, but you are driving with the wheel in your hands. And when you do that, I know you're going to have more success because the research demonstrates that you achieve your goals more than when I tell you what to do. Now, in fact, we have some studies, and this particular study from 2021, I love it, because in fact, they discovered that self-regulation with goals impacts the psychological well-being of academic performance. Sorry, increasing academic performance. And this particular research, they suggest that universities and educational practitioners develop relevant training programs, workshops, and interventions to cultivate college students to proactively engage in self-regulating behaviors. Brilliant advert for coaching in education. So we're seeing that there is an impact. And another of my favorite research results. Gorka was actually at our conference in March, April in Spain. Gorka last year came out with this impacting research. Now, the important thing to remember here, everybody, is non-directive coaching, not telling people what to do. And here we see that non-directive coaching increases insights. It increases connections, aha moments. And that's exactly what we want in the learning environment. Demonstrated here. So we have the research demonstrating that coaching is having an impact. So let's go back to this question, what is it? Well, coaching, firstly, let's say it's not regulated. This is why we have so much confusion. This is why everybody can call themselves a coach, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, when you see professional coaches that have received training, that's when you see that you have a skill set that people who just call themselves a coach potentially, I'm going to say, don't have as much of. Now, the International Coach Federation is the worldwide recognized body which sets out the standards, the guidelines, the ethics for the coaching profession worldwide. Just to clarify, everybody, the ICF has nothing to do with languages. They are focused on professional coaching training. And they accredit courses that demonstrate that those courses bring in the core competences and the skills that a professional coach needs to have. The ICF, founded in the 1990s, it's a non-profit organization, and they are worldwide recognized. Now, there are other bodies like the ECB, the European Coaching Board, International Authority for Professional Coaching Mentoring. Some of them are regional, some of them are worldwide, but the most recognized is the ICF. And just as an aside, all of our programs are accredited by the ICF. And I do think this is where you get the standards and the ethics and the guidelines and the core competences of being a coach. Now, these are the competences. They actually changed them. And in 2021, they amalgamated 12 into 8. And these are the 8 core competences for being a professional coach. And the training obviously takes you into each of those much more deeply. In neurolanguage coaching, we integrate every single competence into what we do. So these are weaved in to how we deliver our language coaching sessions. So, how can coaching enhance learning? Well, I always say it can do that in 3 different directions. The first direction is, and we mentioned this earlier, coaching is the communicative vehicle for us as an educator. It changes the way that we communicate totally. We change the pattern of communication. We become non-directive. We are conscious of the words and the impact that words have. Everything that we say has an impact on the person that we're speaking with. Every question that we ask is going to take that learning conversation one way or another. And we have to, may I say, shift out of automatic mode into metacognitive conscious mode. This is something that's not so easy because, you know, if you've been a teacher, and I was a teacher for years, can I confess it took me a long time to stop using closed questions. Firstly, because I wasn't even aware that I was asking them. And secondly, when I became aware, I couldn't stop myself. And these are the habits that we need to start observing, recognizing, becoming aware of, and changing. And that requires transformation of us. Secondly, coaching can change the structure of learning. Now, we mentioned earlier about goals. We mentioned that we are definitely moving away from generic to specific. Now, in Neurolanguage, we actually have 2 focus points for goals. We have mechanical goals, which are grammar, structure, and pronunciation, what I call the nuts and bolts, and the mastery, which are the functional aspects of language. And we have goals being set on those 2 levels, specific goals. From the goals, we then come into actions, activities. So the structure of learning becomes a cycle, a cyclical spiral, if you like, more of a spiral than a round and round. We set the goal, get the activities, time period, goal review, set the next, and all the time they're moving forwards, advancing step by step. Time period is crucial in a coaching process. There must be a time period. Finally, coaching impacts with powerful coaching conversations. I always say that when you become a coach in education, you become a master of improvisation, because you are going to be, I really feel this is a dichotomy. On the one side, you've got the structure, the framework, the curriculum, what we have to do. And on the other side, we've got the let go and let flow. So I call it a structured let go and let flow. And one of the keys is knowing when to ask what, or knowing when to say what, to provoke, trigger, and help them to learn faster. We've said about teacher communication changing. We mentioned a little bit earlier that we are moving into compassionate conversations much, much more. Taking care of those negative emotions. And that means we're going to be coaching them, using the coaching again as a communicative vehicle to bridge the neuroscience. We're using the coaching for the emotional triggers, troubleshooting any learning issues, and even coaching conversation about learning how to learn. And even grammar goes into a coaching conversation. Now, I've actually created a coaching model, which is called PACT PQC. Rika last night was with me as one of our groups were practicing this. And it really is, it allows the flowing coaching conversation around grammar and non-grammar. And it involves the learner. You know, coaching is about involving. It's not about talking at. We're moving away from talking at learners to talking with, much, much more. We're involving them. So we've got the neuro and the coaching coming together. And, you know, I do say once you've done some coaching training, once a coach, always a coach. It's very hard to go back. When you change those patterns of communication, it really is a journey that you don't come back from. And just to say that people who have or are neurolanguage coaches really go into that mastery of setting goals. They go into a non-directive, non-violent communication. May I say as well, added sensitivity as well, to really sense what's happening with the learners. And we mentioned earlier, this is about us adapting to them and not how it's been over the last centuries, did we say, where they adapted to us. And can I just bring us back, and Dimitris, it's only because I've just seen you, we go back to the ancient Greeks. You know, the ancient Greeks had this beautiful interaction, dialogue, Socratic dialogue with the learners. And there was a film which I totally loved, and I do recommend it to all of you. It was the film Agora. And I think it was about the philosopher Helena, one of the last Greek philosophers. And that film really demonstrated that sort of interactive learning process. It was beautiful. And that's where we need to go back to. We need to come back to this. We've been consumed with the systems that have imposed how we as teachers, trainers, educators should be operating. Now it's about us coming back into how we naturally, intuitively want to operate. So just as a final, we are wrapping up, everybody, and I know that we've been rolling for an hour and a quarter, so thank you for your focus and attention. The courses that we run are, as I say, accredited by the ICF. The first Neurolanguage coaching course is 36 hours, and that particular course brings in the fully fledged certification accreditation. You do not need to do any of the other courses if you don't want to. If you fall in love with the process and want to do more, you're always welcome. But a lot of people ask me, do I need to do all of the courses? No, with the first one, you are fully fledged. May I say I need to change this slide because we're coming up to about 1,500 Neurolanguage coaches around the world. We actually have 32 teacher trainers who are delivering in 12 different languages across the world. We've got Virginia with us, our Chinese teacher trainer. And by the end of the year, we should be delivering in 15 other languages. And one of them will be Greek as well. And we do have the most beautiful community, and many of you are with us today. We keep in touch afterwards. We're always here to troubleshoot. In fact, tomorrow morning, we have a private troubleshooting for the Neurolanguage coaches in the morning. We have conferences, we have webinars, as you see. And I was saying at the beginning, we will be having a few more webinars this month of June. So you're always welcome, all of you. And we set up a foundation last year. We finally got the approval from the Spanish government after 2.5 years of tussling. We finally got there, and we're slowly moving that in the background. We created the Academy, and we launched the Academy last month. And the Academy is focused on educational and language coaching courses. And my desire is that all the courses that we are offering through the Academy will be mirrored in the foundation, and we'll be able to bring those courses to less fortunate schools, teachers across the world. So that's the vision that we absolutely have. And if you weren't here at the beginning, everybody remember that next week, the 9th and the 10th, we have the Neuro Heart Education Summit. So do have a look at the webpage, neurohearteducationsummit.com. We have some brilliant speakers about brilliant topics. It's not about neurolanguage coaching. It's about general, how do we bring in the neuro, how do we bring in the heart into the educational world of today. And in a minute, I'm going to open the mics to questions, to anything that you need. By the way, we will be sending certificates, but please be patient. Gary, who is our genius with all of the technology, over the next weeks, he will then send the certificates. So don't panic if you don't receive it immediately. Over the next weeks, you will get it. He is absolutely, I'm going to use a very British term, he's bogged down with a lot of stuff. And if any of you are interested, we're doing a flash offer. If anybody wants to jump on quickly to the course on Monday, with pleasure you can. We're also opening that offer to Neurolanguage coaches. If any of you want to repeat, you're welcome to jump in. But it's only for that Monday course, not for any of the others. And we do have courses all through the summer. Virginia, I think, has the Chinese course this month as well. We've got the course in Spanish, Chinese, Italian this month. So it's a busy, busy month of June.